The spirit of Renaissance took many forms, but its earliest expression can be found in the intellectual movement called Humanism.
And when we speak about humanism, we are essentially talking about the dignity of man and his privileged position in this world. The humanists emphasized on the elegance of writing and speech, as well as morality, which stressed the uniqueness of man, his feelings and his potential. It stressed on the nature, the achievement and the potential of humanity, rather than on the power and the mystery of divinity. It was a conceptual and secular shift from religion to the potential of human beings. And it also meant the study of the texts of antiquity with a renewed vigor and interest.
A dictum of Petrarch, one of the earliest proponents of humanism, can be considered the slogan of Renaissance humanism. It is better to will the good than to know the truth.
The root of Renaissance individualism was that each man should freely and harmoniously develop all aspects of his nature. There was a greater stress on moral philosophy than on logic and metaphysics. The freedom of will was important, as was the belief that human personality develops more fully in the context of the family and civic responsibility. The secular conception of happiness included wealth, pleasure, health, and beauty, as well as piety and virtue. A knowledge of languages, especially Greek and Hebrew, was emphasized upon.
Beginning with Petrarch, humanist thought approached the subject of persons through introspection and examination of actual behavior of doctrinal formulas. Striving for good life, yet torn by selfish passion, caught between desire for immortality and for earthly fame, alternating between glory and despair. This was person as Petrarch knew them.
Humanism was based on scholarship. Pope Nicholas V and his successors subsidized attempts of secure lost works of Latin antiquity and to acquire Greek manuscripts from the destroyed Byzantine world. Stress was given on research in an organized and systematic way. It was patronized by kings and princes. They became collectors of ancient manuscripts, and you have these famous libraries, example the library of Pico della Mirandola. The majority of new collectors were especially the Vatican. The attitude of the humanists was antiquarian in devotion to classical models of style and conduct, but original because it was critical, detached, and impartial. This is something that we do not find in the medieval times. Being detached, impartial inquiry is something that is not often seen in medieval history.
Humanists dealt with man willing, creating his own beauty and his own worldly destiny. But the definition of that destiny was very much in the Christian tradition.
You find that questions are being raised about divinity. Where is God? Does God exist? you must remember that the Crusades have already taken place in the 11th century. The tremendous pressure that Europe had to bear because of the Crusades, the hardships followed by the bubonic plague, all these actually now raised questions in the mind of man that does God exist? If he does, why is it that we have to undergo such tremendous hardships? And from this developed the quest to shift away from God and seek answers from humanity itself. That is why there is a shift from a God-centric world towards a much more human-centric world, a man-centric world, where man was now trying to ask questions and answer those questions himself. The stress or the way that during the medieval times, the way that people depended on divinity, that was giving way to assertion of human values, the assertion of humanity, where it was now felt that certain questions could be answered by man. You did not have to go to divinity to get those answers, because divinity so long had not provided the answers. Because if there was God, why then the problems? This is what was resulting in the shift from that God-centric to a man-centric world.
Ma'am, then how did the popes reacted to this shift of man-centric to,
if you talk about religion, it's just that humanism was never divorced from religion. It is not a remarkable break with religion. It is questioning religion. And when it questions religion, the various human values were sought to be incorporated within the fold of the church. The church became, or it was, the main objective was to make the church much more approachable to people. Okay, where you're talking about compassion, where you're talking about lending a ear to the common people comes, and here comes the popes, the cardinals, etc. Because even they could not ignore the trend that that Europe was witnessing during this time.
Some of the eminent scholars of this period are Leonardo Bruni, Cicero, Pico della Mirandola, and the controversial Machiavelli.
Humanism, we found literary expression both in the study of classical and religious texts as well as in original composition. And these original compositions were mostly in the vernacular. Where you're talking about the study of classical texts, the stress is on writing in Latin. But this is just the aping of the existing texts of antiquity. Where we are talking about new innovations, where you're talking about innovation, new things, we are talking about the vernacular literature that is coming up during this time. Of humanism in all spheres of life, in say painting, in sculpture, in the political ideas, and in culture as a whole. You find how humanism is affecting. It's an all-pervasive effect, not only on society but culture, even on political ideas, where man is becoming important. And you find the stress is on a complete man, based on the Greek concept of the arete. And who is an arete? An arete is someone who can do everything. And there is the replication of that concept during the time of the Renaissance. And the best example of this could be Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. These are people who are adept at so many things. We only know Leonardo da Vinci because he was a great painter. But he was not merely a great painter. He developed all his other faculties as well. This is the importance, where you are talking about not only aping antiquity, but also relating that to the present circumstances. You find the humanist scholars turning to pagans like Cicero, Livy, and Plato. That history of Cicero, Livy, and Plato was sought to be replicated in the era that we are talking about, all a part of the Renaissance. Now, what is interesting to sort of point out here is that modern scholars influenced by classical works regarded that the antiquity was superior to the medieval ages, and that is why the medieval ages was given a tag, and the tag was the Dark Ages, indicating that the period that we are talking about marked a break with the medieval ages. Those are the Dark Ages. Previous to that, we had this golden antiquity of Rome and Greece, which was sought to be replicated in the period that we are talking about. And this is again a very wrong concept, as we have already discussed when we were discussing Renaissance, because the Middle Ages could not be condemned as the Dark Ages. The developments which the Renaissance period that we are talking about, which this period witnessed, were actually a development which was occurring in the medieval times. So this particular period cannot be just called the Dark Ages. Of course, these are the limitations of the interpretation of the previous period, but nonetheless, we know now that humanism, the way the Middle Ages were visualized, was not a correct assessment of the Middle Ages.
Many Eastern scholars fled to Italy, bringing with them important books and manuscripts and a tradition of Greek scholarship.
There were humanist circles which were established where they discuss and debated various ideas. One example is the Platonic Academy of Florence, which was set up in 1439. If you come to art, if you come to the painters, what do we see? Human figures with a greater accuracy was portrayed during this period. Why? Because this was a period which witnessed the rise of anatomical sciences. This was the period which also saw developments in geometry. So man, or the paintings of man, was very lifelike, very lifelike. And we find that the writers, the literary writers, stressed on what? Introspective analysis of the emotional and rational sides of man's nature. So there is introspection about man. Both his emotional side and his rational side was analyzed, was introspected upon. And we find that as I have told you, that this was reflected in the study of history as well.
It was Petrarch who first understood that antiquity was a civilization apart. The focus of Petrarch's insight was language. If classical antiquity was to be understood in its own terms, it would be through the speech with which the ancients communicated their own thought. The Latin in both prose and poetry is undoubtedly a noble language. For that very reason, it has been so thoroughly developed by earlier writers that neither we nor anyone else may expect to add very much to it. The vernacular, on the other hand, has recently been developed, and though it has been ravaged by many, it still remains uncultivated in spite of a few earnest laborers, and still shows itself capable of much improvement and enrichment. Stimulated by this thought and by the enterprise of youth, I began an extensive work in that language. I laid the foundations of that structure and got together my lime and stone and wood.
How were these new ideas spread? Through ecclesiastical legates, through the merchants, through the traders, through the professors who were traveling to the north. And it is just not one-way traffic. It's not that these ideas were just being, taken from Italy to the rest of Europe. Ideas from the rest of Europe were also coming into Italy.
What is the difference between civic humanism and Christian humanism?
In humanism, the influence of, say, Plato could not be disregarded by the Christian church. The Christian church was as much influenced by the ideas of Plato as was secular humanisms. And they tried to incorporate these so-called pagan ideas into the fold of Christianity. And this is what Christian humanism is, where this new humanistic knowledge is being incorporated into the fabric of Christianity. Whereas, where civic humanism is concerned, we find that this humanism, it was felt, could best be realized in family life and in the various civic societies that were formed in the Italian cities. This is the basic difference. The same ideas being incorporated in various circumstances, and thereby the results were not radically different, but of course you can differentiate between the Christian humanism and civic humanism. Find that during this time the circular church comes into being. And what is the importance of the circular church? Where the altar is equidistant from all places. So the congregation can sort of reach the altar from all sides in an equal way. So God is not far away. God is close to man. This is a signifier.
Ma'am, can we say that God replicated human form in humanism?
Yes. It's not God only. It is the whole divinity it took a very human character. Something which now became very palpable. God was made lifelike in humanism. Where if you look at the forms of in art, specifically in art and painting, if you look at the content of the paintings or the art, then you will see that the content was religious. It was Christian in content. But if you look at the forms that were used, it was it was a human form. So God was made much more human. God had a human face now. I would like to draw your attention to that fall of man in the Sistine Chapel, the famous painting of the fall of man. It's a fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It is, of course, the fall of man as has been visualized by Christianity, because Adam ate the forbidden apple, and that is why man fell. And this is the theme of the painting of Sistine Chapel, but can we see it in another way?
The creation of Adam is another work of iconic value on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. God crosses the heavens like a cosmic meteor. Adam receives from God's right finger the spark of life.
Can we say that when man is leaving the hand of God, he is actually becoming much more individualistic, and is actually not depending on God? So these are the various manifestations of humanism, whether it is Christian humanism or where we turn our attention to civic humanism.
Civic humanism is a line of humanism that expounded the ideas of republican citizenship and the means of classical studies for public life.
How far did the common people become secular at this time?
The common people, the Renaissance is actually very aristocratic. So for the common man to become secular, in fact the common man has now started asking questions. This tremendous pressure that he is under is now casting a doubt in the minds of the common man also, that does God exist? So as far as that is concerned, yes, the common man is asking questions. He is asking questions about divinity. He is asking the place of divinity in his life, or if at all, God is relevant to his existence. But at the same time, if you talk about humanism affecting the common man, it is far too sophisticated an idea to actually permeate down to those levels. If you look at Machiavelli's books, The Discourse and The Prince, it's so very secular. And in fact, Machiavelli exemplifies civic humanism. If you were talking about, sort of totally ignoring Christian beliefs and Christian tenets, it is Machiavelli's Prince, where he's talking about statecraft, how a ruler should rule.
Machiavelli's treatise, Prince, that expounded on how to grab power and cling onto it, made him a controversial character. His name became synonymous with wily, manipulative tactics. An excerpt from Machiavelli's Prince. A prince must know how to play at once man and beast, lion and fox. He neither should nor can keep his word when to do so, will turn against him. It is very disadvantageous always to be honest. Useful, on the other hand, to appear pious and faithful. Nothing is more useful than the appearance of virtue.
The whole idea is to revitalize both the human life and the church. On the one hand, you have the humanism, which is Christian humanism. On the other hand, you have the humanism, which is civic humanism. Civic humanism is much more secular. It could not be called totally secular, because I told you that you are actually the creature of your times. You cannot ignore the times that you are born in. So some influences of your time is bound to be there in you, but nonetheless, in spite of this pull effect, civic humanism is a secular trend of humanism. Civic humanism is where you have the writing of history, the way history has, it speaks about analysis today. For the first time, on the lines of Cicero's history, on the lines of Pliny's history, history began to be rewritten very impartially. It's not at all connected to religion. It's not at all the copying of Christian manuscripts. A secular analysis of events where events are seen very impartially. The history that we now, or what we understand by history today, is something which developed during those times.
Humanism took the human nature in all its various manifestations and achievements as its subject. Humanism emphasized the dignity of man. Humanism stressed the unity and compatibility of truth found in all theological and philosophical schools and systems, a doctrine known as syncretism. Humanism looked forward to the rebirth of a lost human spirit and wisdom. The effect of humanism was to help men break free from the mental strictures imposed by religious orthodoxy, to inspire free inquiry and criticism, and to inspire a new confidence in the possibilities of human thought and creation. From Italy, the new humanist spirit spread north to all parts of Europe, aided by the invention of printing.